Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, reporting on the 11th day of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's extradition trial, which has been unfolding in London at the Old Bailey courthouse. We are in the third week, and it is going to stretch into a fourth week, and scheduling has become a part of the story of the case. It's become a problem. It's become a difficulty for the judge. It's become a difficulty for the defense. It's become something that the prosecutors have to deal with as well. And I see a question, which I'll get to shortly, about the pressure from the judge to wrap up the proceedings as fast as possible. I will get to that. First, let's take the witnesses that took the stand today. Go over give you a summary of what I think went down in the morning and the afternoon. We had Dr. Quinton Deely, who is a National Health Service psychiatrist who specializes in autism, ADHD, and other mental health issues, who took the stand. This was somebody who was tasked by the defense or was a defense witness that assessed Julian Assange, diagnosed him, and determined that he did have autism. And the important thing about Deely is that he stands alone as the only doctor or psychiatrist or even psychologist who met with Assange and made this diagnosis. So the prosecutors really tried to discredit Deely for making this diagnosis. And part of the reason why they want to make sure that they can undermine the idea that Assange may be autistic is because this can play a role in preventing extradition. I'm going to go into some more detail in my written report. I'll probably look at this pretty closely. And I can't even really speak about it that well offhand right now, so I have to go through some education. But there are previous cases involving Lori Love and Gary McKinnon, and these were both individuals who were accused of hacking offenses by the United States, and the UK blocked their extraditions, or the extraditions of those people did not happen, and the diagnoses of autism or having autistic traits was something that was referenced by these courts as reasons why they weren't extradited or why the courts opposed the decision. So naturally, the prosecutors had a pretty good incentive to try to attack and undermine Deely today as he presented his basis for giving Julian Assange this diagnosis. It was mentioned that Assange told Deely about the fears of being extradited to the United States, of what isolation would be like in U.S. prisons, of what would happen with a new indictment. He was concerned about Joshua Schulte. Joshua Schulte was accused of releasing the Vault 7 materials that ended in a mistrial, but he was confined before trial and he was held in some pretty highly restrictive conditions, and he was concerned that he would undergo and be subject to that same treatment. So we heard Deely go down and talk through talking about some of the factors, talking about some of what Assange had exhibited, how the risk of suicide would increase, especially as he dreads outcomes like being extradited, especially as he has to deal with the prospective circumstances that are changing, and including whether his sentence would be lengthy, maybe even amount to a life sentence, given the fact that he is 49 years old. And eventually, James Lewis took the stand. And again, like what we've seen is they have very much, or there's little sensitivity on the part of the prosecutors for mental illness, for what people go through as they live with these conditions. And in fact, they would only accept that Julian Assange is susceptible to all of this if he was a completely unfunctioning human being is the takeaway that I get. So obviously they were challenging his autism diagnosis immediately, though. They went to the Q&A sessions that he has done for venues like the Frontline Club, where he's talked about where back in 2010, he talked about the journalism that WikiLeaks was doing on the Afghan war logs, and also on the collateral murder video. At that point, they played this clip, and it was from August 12th, 2010. And at that point, there had been 70,000 war logs released on the Afghanistan war. And he went through and he was having these discussions. And James Lewis believes basically that, the fact that he was able to function during this Q&A and answer questions, that suggests he's not really an autistic person, because an autistic person could not do this. That's essentially the argument that the prosecutor was making, which Dealey rejected and said this is a highly rehearsed social role of him talking about a topic in which he has expertise. This is structured. It's not really like people are putting questions to him or interrupting him and having him adjust his answer. There's not a whole lot of an exchange going on. It's pretty comfortable for Julian Assange. It's not a debate format. It's pretty comfortable where he gets to just say what he has in response to the question that he's heard, and he has much expertise on it, and he's able to deal with it. And it's not like an informal social interaction where he might not be able to pick up on certain cues. That was the testimony. And it upset James Lewis that this witness was giving this kind of a answer to him. He's really upset that that playing video clips in the middle of the court proceedings didn't produce the effect that he had hoped. And this was the first video that we've had screened in the courtroom. And I'd say, given the technical difficulties that we had, it was remarkable. We were able to see it, and the people in the courtroom were able to see it. I was able to see it on the feed that I received. And so that seems like some kind of an accomplishment, given what we've all been going through over these past weeks. But then, that didn't work, and he became rather antagonistic and said, "Are you trying to help the court or advocate a cause, Lewis?" And then it went through a lot of things, again, suggesting that somebody who's autistic can't be a functioning human being. Well, he's had children, and he's had women who were his partners. How could it be that, everything you say is true, that this is his diagnosis, that he has trouble with all of this if he's been able to have children and have these relationships? And then, could it be depression's maybe the alternative explanation for the reasons why you saw a reduction in his nonverbal communication? And then going through and making all of these suggestions that somebody who hosts a chat show, he calls it a chat show, the show that Julian had, where he did like 7 or 8 episodes interviewing some of the more prominent academics and world leaders and figures. He did the World Tomorrow for RT back. This was very much. It was at least 9 or 8 years ago that he did this show. And it was before he got his asylum granted to him from Ecuador. And he interviewed Rafael Correa. And so we keep hearing from James Lewis, the chat show, and how could he do a chat show? And he writes speeches and he coordinates with media. How could somebody autistic do all of this? So, very directly trying to undermine this idea that the diagnosis was somehow legitimate from this doctor. Of course, so the defense was able to come back and ask about those clips, and the doctor had done a well enough job defending himself. But he again made the point that this is monologuing. He's not really interacting with people. There are examples a woman named Suletta Dreyfus from Australia, who wrote a book about Julian Assange, had a pretty good relationship with Assange for some time in Australia. And in fact, when she wrote a lot of material down that has been used for these proceedings, and it essentially is like she was trying to teach him social skills so that he could manage his mental condition, and that what she describes are things that people like Dealey and even Koppelman, the doctor who testified on day 10, they spoke about as evidence and the basis that they factored into how they assessed his condition. And all of this is important, whether or not he would have a condition like this, because the way he would be treated in the U.S. prison system, it could be much worse for him given these diagnoses. So in the afternoon, we had a witness who took the stand. His name's Sina Fazel, and this was a medical expert for the prosecution. So it was the first prosecution witness in this extradition trial, which meant that James Lewis started with him, and he had done an assessment. It was after he had come down from being in his worst state in November and December, where he was severely depressed, had severe symptoms of anxiety. And so he determined that it was depression, but he wouldn't necessarily find that there were psychotic features. He found it to be more mild compared to some of the other doctors that assessed Assange, which is probably why the prosecution wanted to put him on the stand. And this was emphasized by James Lewis. And so then now we had the defense cross-exam. So having presented Fazel and showing what he did and the way he looked at some of the mental health problems and talked about the kinds of behavioral therapies that could be done for Assange, and maybe alluded to what could happen in U.S. prisons to take care of him. Then we brought the defense. The defense were able to question him in the same manner that James Lewis had done, although they didn't get petty with him. They were very civil as he went through the different answers that he had. And essentially, he was saying that there's a lot of different factors that go into determining whether somebody is at risk of suicide. The defense wants to focus on the supermax prison element, the fact that he could be put under special administrative measures, the way he would be treated in these facilities, possible solitary confinement, and everything that would change as he goes through his case in the United States. And there are other factors that you have to bring in as well. And, he was being very scientific, and I took him to be a very legitimate and honest person, even though, there were things that we maybe could disagree upon as he was just talking about Assange. And, one of those things that I thought was kind of odd is how, he could in one breath acknowledge the risk of solitary confinement, but in the same breath, in a later answer, he could say that someone could be put in solitary confinement and do just fine, and that there may not be much of a problem. And so invariably, some of the more drier answers, or some of the more, I wouldn't call them callous, but just some of the more statistical answers that were given by Fazel-led, Fitzgerald just emphasized that, we want to do things in a humane way. We want to make sure that if somebody has this, we could avoid an outcome where that person ends up dead. And so he kept saying, okay, yes, Assange has higher risk of suicide, but let's put that into the context. We need to look at what the population of men his age and how many of them commit suicide. And Fitzgerald would come back and say, look, but what if we just don't do the things that might cause him to commit suicide, rather than focus on the low number of people there are already, needless to say, he doesn't have to become a statistic, a part of that statistic. So Feazell took this stand, and I will say that one of the more important moments came toward the end of the the re-examination by prosecutor James Lewis, when he was in the witness box and he's asked to react to all the different things that Gordon Kromberg, who is the assistant U.S. attorney, says about what Julian Assange would be facing if he was incarcerated at ADX Colorado. This is a supermax prison. And they heavily dispute a lot of the more bleaker and realistic, in my view, and the more so they're giving the Bureau of Prisons, list of, let's say, amenities or things that would be available to prisoners. They're talking about the programs that are available. They're talking about the kinds of food that would be available, the sorts of access to recreation and interaction with people. And a lot of it undercuts the more social science reports, the things like there's the Center for Constitutional Rights that did a report on the abusive conditions. So Kromberg's directly trying to undermine that evidence and make it seem like there's no threat to Julian Assange. That it's not hell. That there is no part of the supermax prison that is hell if Julian Assange would be put in any of the more higher security units inside of that maximum security prison. And when Lewis read off all of the different things that he felt would probably prevent Julian Assange from committing suicide, Feazell's response was to say, well, you know what? I would need to know about these range of activities that you say reduce the risk of suicide. I would want to know more about them. I'd like to know whether what you said are implemented in practice. It sounds like those are all the things that are available, but whether they are actually granted or if prisoners get to take part in them on a regular basis, or maybe they're not, maybe you don't get to do them as often as you're suggesting. Maybe they're part of the prison, but you don't get to utilize them. And he said, I want to know the quality of those programs or services that are supposed to help prisoners. And you would need to see the information on whether these happened and the quality of any interventions to take care of prisoners' mental health. I thought that was really an appropriate answer to a question that actually kind of undercuts what the prosecution is doing, because they are just reading what in the abstract the Bureau of Prisons has laid out in their facilities. It doesn't speak to the operations and how they can be cruel or abusive, and how it doesn't really work in a way that is humane for people who are incarcerated. So I'm going to catch up on some questions here. I'd like to thank everyone who has joined so far. First, I want to get to this question that we have of what do you think about the pressure from the judge to wrap up the proceedings so fast without giving many potential witnesses a chance to testify? So that goes to something that entered into the proceedings today related to the judge saying she wants the last witness to be called on October 2nd. So that means the end of the 4th week. And then she would like closing arguments to be had on the Monday and Tuesday afterwards, that 5th week. As we concluded court today, Edward Fitzgerald, who's an attorney for Assange, told the judge that he does not feel he would be able to do justice to Julian Assange's case if he isn't given more time. They've been trying to manage the witnesses, trying to put them on the stand, trying to deal with scheduling issues. And he would like to come back in a month and have 2 days. The defense can put on their closing argument. The prosecutor can put on his and their closing argument. And then that would be the end of it, and Judge Vanessa Baretzer could take everything, and she could afterward, and it probably would take a few weeks, she would issue a ruling on the extradition of Julian Assange. And so it's become tense because it definitely seems like Vanessa Baretzer is micromanaging the defense, just because she wants to make sure everything gets done based on a schedule. But we are doing this under conditions that do not support the original plan for this extradition trial. We were supposed to have this in May. We were supposed to meet. All of these witnesses would have flown to London, except for the ones that were too old, maybe had conditions that prevented them from travel. I would say one of those witnesses would be Noam Chomsky, although now he is simply just submitting a witness statement and not going to take the stand to testify. But, Noam, being in his 90s, probably wasn't going to travel to London, but he was willing to participate in the case. So anyways, all of these witnesses would have gone to London to participate in this proceeding. And when they were done, they'd fly back home. But we've had time zone issues. We've got people spread out around the globe. There are people in Australia. There are witnesses who are in the US. We've got some who are in London, some who are in Germany or Switzerland. They're all over the map. And so you have difficulties getting people slotted so that they can testify, and schedules change. And as things move and as the parts are altered, people have schedules. What happened was on that fourth day, what was supposed to be the fourth day of court, we found that, the prosecutor came in and said that they were tested for COVID-19. And so now they were going to need to wait for their test results, which would come back on Friday. Fridays before the weekend. Court doesn't meet on the weekend. So the next time we were going to meet in court was on that Monday. In any case, we lost 2 days of proceedings. We lost a day on the first day because we spent almost all of the day on the fresh extradition request, this third extradition request that was input by the prosecutors. We've been dealing with technical difficulties that have made it hard to efficiently move through witnesses on some days. Prosecutors have spent 3 and 4 hours with some of the witnesses on questions and issues and matters of law that don't involve actually eliciting or getting original evidence or new evidence that would be useful to the judge. Arguing with U.S. attorneys about their interpretations of legal and judicial precedents and older laws and past cases, arguing with them about the way that they are speaking and viewing prison conditions in the United States. And so I think, they are to blame too for where we are, for taking longer with some of these witnesses. It isn't only the defense that has led us to this point where things are taking longer. And, I, as anybody who has to get up so early in the morning to do this work, would like this to wrap up as soon as possible to keep things moving efficiently. But it can't all be put on the defense as being responsible. It's not like they're so disorganized that this is where we are. So I think, that appearance of fairness that the judge is supposed to have, I do believe that it is not right for her to demand that they be able to put together the closing argument while they are also simultaneously trying to get witnesses lined up for the last 5 to 7 days that we have here. It's really difficult what they are trying to do. That's a lot of witnesses. We're talking about 44 witnesses. We're talking about 14 witnesses. I misspoke. 14 witnesses who are expected to be in 1 week. And on average for these weeks, we have only been hearing from about, let's say, 7 or 8 witnesses. We're doing about 2 a day, sometimes 1 a day. To get 14, that's working about twice as much. That's trying to get twice as many in as we've done. So I don't know, that might be more boring than getting into some of the more important aspects of the case that involve risks to press freedom, involve human rights and torture and the U.S. war crimes that WikiLeaks exposed. But it's important to say this because it's become part of this case, because now, we even have Bretzer interrupting the defense to take issue with how questions are put to witnesses, which wasn't happening before. But I think she's starting to try to worm her way in to see if she can speed this up, because she knows that it isn't going to make it on time. So let me go through some other questions that we have. And again, anything that you want to add, I will answer. And I'm going to wrap this up here in the next 5 or 10 minutes. And thank you to everyone for watching these day end reports and for supporting my journalism. And if you really do like what I'm doing, there you go. That'd be awesome. Just a few bucks my way to keep this going. We can't do this kind of journalism without support from people like you. And also, there are many of us out there, independent, who I've given credit and shared the work that they are doing. So it's us. We're leading the way. The establishment media has become bored with this case, as they tend to do. They were bored in the first week. They've taken a little interest now because they like the storyline around Julian Assange going psychotic. But now, after that's over, after we're done with the doctors, then we probably won't hear from them much until closing argument, to be quite honest. So do you have any information who will be the next witnesses brought in by the prosecution? So our next witnesses, we have a couple doctors that are going to take the stand tomorrow. There's one, I believe, a Dr. Blackwood, who is, I think, a prosecution witness. And then there's another Dr. Sandra Crosby, who met with Julian Assange in the Ecuador embassy, and she's going to share her testimony. That's all in the afternoon tomorrow. We get to start a little bit later, which means I get a little extra sleep. So I'm happy about that. Considering how Assange has been treated to date, not least by the judge herself, do you think the medical witnesses in this case will do much to get Bretzer to change her mind? I don't know. I mean, there's always ways that you can marginalize or undermine or discount these medical witnesses. And it all depends on how you're willing to believe that they are experts. I note that I think it's going to make a difference here that out of all the doctors, there's only one that this isn't my example. Out of all the doctors, there's only one that says he has autism. And so she's probably not going to accept that he does, but she might accept that he has autistic-like traits, and that might factor into some of her decision. So that's just an example of one thing that I think, if she can't find enough corroboration for it, and she's really going to seek a lot of evidence when trying to weigh in favor of the defense, if they don't meet a certain level in her mind, I think she's going to side with the prosecutors. And we could probably guess that it's kind of difficult what the defense has to do. They have to come up with quite a bit of evidence to discourage her. John Shipton looked particularly defeated today. Didn't have much good to say about the judge. John Shipton being Julian's father. Yeah, I mean, I'd say it feels quite oppressive what she is doing. The micromanaging. I really wish that there was a different way to do this, because this is time that's very limited for the defense, and to be sorting it out in real time in front of all of us, it does come off as if the defense is doing something wrong, like they haven't done this right, and I'm not sure that that's fair. Questions. Do you think there's any chance the judge will rule in favor of Assange? Seems like the defense are doing a great job, particularly in comparison to the prosecution. Yeah. I couldn't even begin to put on a case to prevent someone from being extradited to the United States, but it does feel like the defense is covering all its bases, and I'm glad that they are still insisting that their remaining witnesses be called so we can be thorough. We've had several journalists talk about the process of publishing WikiLeaks materials, handling redactions, and we've had the doctors now, and they really have this pretty well organized so that we can tackle it. They had witnesses that testified about exposing war crimes and torture. They've had witnesses that have talked about journalism and standard news gathering practices to try and undermine the prosecutors as they seek to stigmatize and make it seem criminal what WikiLeaks did. So it's all been pretty effective in the way that they've gone about this. From afar, it looks like Assange is getting a trial that will do justice and give him freedom. How does it look like from close view? Well, that's interesting because a lot of people who follow my work would probably say the opposite, that they feel like the judge is being unfair and is being biased and isn't doing well. But I think your perception is reasonable because it does look like the defense is doing a very good job of representing Julian Assange and trying to make sure that his rights are protected in all of this and trying to make sure that he does not get extradited to the United States. And I say that we will continue to see a quality of witnesses that can help Julian Assange put on the best case to prevent extradition. What was your reaction in the court when Fazal replied, "I would have to think about that," when asked if depression could increase risk of suicide? Yeah, I didn't notice much more of a reaction compared to other parts of this. He was very analytical, and everything that was put to him kept coming back to this idea that there are many different factors that have to be considered. You can't just consider these couple of factors. And so, yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. That's not really a human response. That's kind of like how a computer would respond to that question. But I can't necessarily say that it is an illegitimate way to answer, because he's not wrong that you have to consider a lot of other things. That the U.S. prison conditions can be something. It can be something that's abusive, that pushes one to suicide. You can also have internal problems with your own self, and there can be something going on with your family or your friends or with you that I suppose those external factors wouldn't be solely responsible for. But I would always respond that solitary confinement, no matter what, is so cruel and inhuman that it's going to drive people to do things that either are self-harming or involve suicide. So it should just be avoided. And depression, obviously, I just think, objectively, that would make you more feel like there was more of a bleak outlook, although people live with it all the time and they don't act on suicidal ideations. And that is definitely true. Now, as we wrap up, do I know of any witnesses that will address the absurd hacking allegations? On Friday, we were supposed to hear from Patrick Eller, who will talk about the testimony in Chelsea Manning's trial or court-martial that relate to this hacking, alleged computer crime offense. It's not really a hacking charge. It's the alleged computer crime offense that involves the password hash. So that will be a good day. And he's supposed to be all day giving his testimony. So I've been on here for about a half hour and I'm going to wrap. Thank you all for your continued support of my work. Thank you for following the Assange case. If you're not following what I'm reporting, please go find the list of people at shadowproof.com. I put together a guide of independent journalists and or court reporters that are covering this case. Follow them. If you care about Julian Assange and you're upset that the mass media isn't covering this well, then at least find somebody so you can be informed daily of what's going on in this trial. It's a crucial trial that has worldwide implications, and you need to be in tune with what is developing every other day at least, or catch up every week on what is happening so that you know what the U.S. government is doing to try and bring a journalist to the United States and put that journalist on trial. You can go to dissenter.substack.com if you have not already to subscribe and receive in your inbox the written reports that I'm doing every single day that we are in session. I will be doing these until the end of the extradition trial, so you'll want to receive those. They're easy, and you don't have to go searching for my reports. They'll come right to you. I do these every single day after court. And then my live updates are at Gosztola on Twitter. I do a full thread of what is being said and what is happening in court with the witnesses and the interaction between the judge or the exchanges between the judge and prosecutors and the defense, matters that involve the scheduling and the future of the trial and all of that. So I thank you for following, and I will be back on day 12 of this trial with some more updates.